Mountains. You know them, you love them, you just can't get over them. Mountains. We got to acknowledge something. We're doing the Mount Rushmore of mountains. Mount Rushmore, which is a mountain with 4 human faces carved into it, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, a mountain that we've named a conceptual framework after that we're now applying to mountains. So the thing we named the framework after is itself the very category we're analyzing. I'm aware of this. Choosing to do it anyway. If anything, the circularity suggests that I'm onto something. So the methodology. We're not just looking for the tallest mountain here, the most dangerous mountain, or the mountain you saw in a screensaver in 2003 and found vaguely peaceful. We're looking for the 4 mountains that most fundamentally shaped the human experience of mountains: exploration, mythology, culture, and the specific modern idea that climbing a rock to its highest point is something that a person ought to do. Hey, I wrote that. How modern can that be? Oh, let's see. How old is mountain climbing? Why am I Googling this? Moses did it. Oh, wait, hold up. Hold the fort. As a sport, it's about 260 years old on the high end. Okay. Screw you, Moses. Okay, we're pushing forward through the script. Onward. We're looking at mountains that changed what it means to be a mountain. So before we get into it, though, we're going to start with some honorable mentions. 3 mountains that are enormous in human history, but not on the list. First up, Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is, by the argument that matters to the largest number of people, the most significant mountain in human history. The Torah, the Bible, the Quran all identify it as the location where Moses came back, received the 10 Commandments, the foundational moral and legal code that shaped Western civilization and then Eastern civilization, and then most other civilizations through subsequent expansion of 3 Abrahamic faiths. The number of people whose moral framework is downstream of this mountain is approximately 4.2 billion with a B. For context, the entire human population is 8 billion. More than half the planet organizes its ethical life downstream of this mountain. So why isn't it on the list? 2 reasons. First, the location of the biblical Mount Sinai is disputed, genuinely, actively disputed. There's more than a dozen candidate mountains, none of which has been definitively established as the site. The most commonly accepted candidate, Jebel Musa in Egypt, said that great, stands at 2,285 meters. It is, in pure mountain metrics, a hill, a significant hill with a monastery at the base, but still a hill. Second, the load-bearing element here is the story and the text, not the mountain. The 10 Commandments would be the 10 Commandments regardless of what mountain we pulled them off of. So the mountain is a backdrop, not the actor. This does not diminish its spiritual significance to billions of people, but it does mean it's a different kind of load-bearing than we're measuring today. Mount Sinai is the most consequential backdrop in human history, presented in the honorable mentions, absent from our Rushmore. Honorable mention, K2. Now, K2 is the second highest mountain in the world at 8,611 meters, and within the serious mountaineering community, supposedly, it's the first mountain, the Savage Mountain, a name coined in 1953 when American climber George Bell nearly died on it and told a reporter, "It's a savage mountain." Grammar is blunt, assessment is accurate. Everest has a fatality rate of roughly 1% per summit attempt. K2 is closer to 23. Jeez, for every 4 people that reach the summit, 1 dies. That's not a screensaver mountain. That's not a bucket list mountain. That's just a kick the bucket mountain. This is a mountain that's been filtering applicants aggressively since its first successful summit in 1954. It took 1,954 years to successfully climb this mountain. Oh, I'm an idiot. The world started before 0. All right, I'm a very, very young Earth creationist here. K2 shaped the culture of mountaineering by existing as the anti-Everest, the mountain that tells you what you find when you strip away the guides, the supplemental oxygen, the fixed ropes, and the commercial infrastructure that Everest has accumulated since the 1990s. It defined a tier of climbing culture that views Everest as the tourist destination and K2 as an actual mountain. It has an entire philosophy attached to it. So why isn't it on the list? Frankly, it scares me. And also because defining a philosophy within a subculture isn't the same as shaping the broader human experience of mountains. K2 is the insider mountain. Great insiders. but Rushmore needs columns that hold up the outside walls. Third honorable mention is Mount Fuji. Katsushika Hokusai from, I'm going to mess this up, Japan, published 36 views of Mount Fuji between 1831 and 1833. It included the Great Wave off Kanagawa, which is arguably the most reproduced artwork in human history. The series established Mount Fuji as Japan's defining visual symbol, which it has remained for nearly 200 years. It's a Shinto sacred site. It's the most climbed high mountain in the world, with over 300,000 climbers annually, and it was designated in UNESCO UNESCO World Heritage Cultural Site. It is in every measurable cultural sense one of the most significant mountains on Earth. So why isn't it on the list? Because Fuji's significance, while extraordinary, is primarily regional. It is the defining symbol of Japanese culture and identity in a way that's deep but largely contained within that cultural sphere. The 4 mountains on our list are load-bearing for the global human experience of mountains, not the Japanese experience specifically. This is not a demotion. Japan's experience of Fuji is profound, but primarily significant within one of the world's great civilizations is just not quite enough for the Mount Rushmore of mountains. So what is? Let's get to number 4, the Matterhorn. The Matterhorn sits on a border between Switzerland and Italy at 4,478 meters. It is not the highest mountain in Europe. It is not the hardest to climb. It did not birth a religion. It did not invent a sport. What it did is simpler and stranger. It defined what a mountain looks like. We're going to do a little experiment here. Go ask a child, or anyone really, if you don't have a lot of children to ask, go ask them to draw a mountain. They draw Matterhorn. They've never been to Switzerland. They just draw Matterhorn because that's burned within our psyche. They drew it because the Matterhorn is what a mountain is in the human visual vocabulary. Look, I'm doing it right now as I record this. Google Matterhorn. God, that's a mountain. Matterhorn's primary silhouette, 4 steep ridges rising to a near-perfect point, became the default mental image of a mountain in Western cultural consciousness during the 19th century. It is, according to multiple sources, the most photographed mountain in the world. When the Toblerone Chocolate Company was founded, is it Toblerone or Toblerone? Doesn't matter. But when it was founded in 1908, they put the Matterhorn on the packaging because the Matterhorn silhouette was shorthand for Swiss and alpine and elevated in a way that no other mountain was. When Walt Disney built a mountain-themed attraction at Disneyland in 1959, he built the Matterhorn. It opened June 14th, 1959, and was additionally the world's first tubular steel roller coaster. Eat your heart out, Mount Sinai, because that's its own footnote in the history of theme parks. The mountain on the candy bar inspired the ride type that now defines the entire theme park industry. It's a strange amount of downstream consequence for one Swiss peak. But the Matterhorn's role as the mountain that defined the aesthetic of mountains is only half of its claim. The other half came on July 14th. Hey, that's almost my birthday. 1865. Not almost my birthday. Edward Whymper had attempted to summit the Matterhorn 7 times and failed. On his 8th attempt, accompanied by 6 companions, 3 guides, and 3 British climbers, he succeeded. They stood on the summit. They were the first humans to ever do so. The Matterhorn had been considered unclimbable until that point, but they climbed it. Then 4 of the 7 fell to their deaths. Oh, jeez! Then 4 of the 7 fell to their deaths on the descent. A rope snapped. Lord Francis Douglas, Charles Hudson, Douglas Haddo, and Michael Cross fell more than 1,200 meters. Whymper and his 2 surviving guides watched it happen. Y'all, my wife writes these scripts. I'm reading them as like we're experiencing this together. The story reached London within days. Parliament debated whether mountaineering should be banned. Queen Victoria reportedly asked if something could be done to stop gentlemen from climbing mountains. The Times of London ran editorials. The public split between those who considered mountaineering a noble act of human striving and those who considered it Darwin's waiting room. It was the first time a mountain had generated a global conversation of that scale. The first mountain as media event in history. The fact that newspapers in London, Paris, New York, and Vienna were publishing opinions about whether a Swiss mountain was appropriate to climb in 1865 is, in retrospect, the beginning of the relationship between mountains and modern public culture. which I know you're all wondering, when did that begin? The Matterhorn said two things to human civilization simultaneously. First, you can climb the unclimbable. Second, it will cost you. Both of those sentences are load-bearing for everything that came after. The Matterhorn takes its place on Mount Rushmore. Number 3, I'm torn how to pronounce this, I'll be honest with you. Do I say Mont-Blanc as an American? Do I say Mont Blanc? Do I say Mont-Blanc?
This is Julian, the Frenchman who makes French pronunciation and French translation videos here on YouTube, Yes Pronunciation Videos. And we are looking at how to pronounce the name of this German company and German brand.
Alright, we're calling it Mont Blanc. D'accord. On this date, a hunter named Jacques Balmat and a physician named Michel Gabriel Picard climbed to the summit of Mont Blanc, the highest peak in the Alps, at 4,808 meters, and came back down again alive. This was the first time in history any person had done this. Before August 8th, 1786, humans climbed mountains to hunt, to cross passes, to conduct scientific observations, or because something was chasing them and the mountain was the only option. The idea of climbing a mountain simply because it was there as an act of personal achievement against nature did not exist as a formal human activity with a name. After August 8th, 1786, it did. The sport of alpinism, that's not it, was born that date, on that mountain, and it's been going continuously ever since. This requires some context about the cultural movement. The late 18th century was the period of Romanticism, the philosophical and artistic movements that valorized nature, the sublime, and the confrontation of the small human figure against the overwhelming natural scale. The Romantics had been staring at mountains and writing poetry about how simultaneously terrifying and beautiful they were for decades before Balmat and Picard. Rousseau, Goethe, and Shelley all wrote extensively about the Alps. You know it's serious if Shelley's writing about it. The mountain was already becoming a cultural object. What Mont Blanc provided was the answer to a question Romanticism had been asking. What do you do about the mountain? You climb it. You find out what's up. You discover whether the sublime will kill you or transform you. And if it transforms you, you come back and you tell everyone about it. The prize that drove the first ascent was offered by Horace Benedict de Saussure, a Swiss naturalist who had been offering a cash reward to whoever reached the summit since 1760, 26 years before it was collected. 26 years. That's almost a full me. The mountain stood there for a quarter century with a bounty on its head before anyone figured out how to collect it. When Balmat and Picard claimed the prize, de Saussure himself summited it the following year, in 1787. He spent 4.5 hours on the summit making scientific measurements. Had he just been a hair faster, he would have gotten that money himself, dang it. Within a decade, the British Alpine Club was founded, and within a century, every major peak in Europe had been attempted, and most had been successfully summited. Within 170 years, Everest was climbed, and the logic of, I will attempt this because it is the hardest thing, had been exported to every mountain on Earth. Every person who has ever trained for a climb, bought mountaineering equipment, read a summit account, or watched a documentary about people doing something very difficult on mountains for reasons that are difficult to articulate, all of that is the cultural inheritance of August 8th, 1786. Balmat and Picard did not invent the mountain, they invented the act of going to find it. Number 2, Mount Olympus. Not the tallest mountain on this list, not even close. In fact, if I had the energy to do a little text overlay here, I would put it at approximately 5,000th. Mount Olympus is a 2,918 meter mountain in northern Greece. In terms of pure height, it's not competitive with anything else in the script. In terms of influence on the human imagination, it is the reason you assume gods live above you. Let's be precise about what Mount Olympus actually did. In ancient Greek religion, Olympus was the home of 12 Olympian gods: Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Poseidon, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, Demeter, and Dionysus. This was not metaphorical. The Greeks genuinely believed the gods lived on a specific mountain, in specific palaces, and that the mountain was simply tall enough that humans couldn't see the divine architecture because of the cloud cover. The Greek gods and the mythological tradition they inhabit are the single most influential narrative framework in Western literature, art, philosophy, and popular culture. Every major Roman deity is a reskinned Greek deity. Every Renaissance painting of divine subjects is painted in the tradition that Greek mythology established. Every modern superhero franchise draws directly from Greek heroic tradition. Percy Jackson, Wonder Woman, God of War, Hercules, Clash of Titans, and approximately 40% of all fantasy literature published in the English language are downstream of the Greeks. And it all started with the specific premise that gods live on a mountain, not in a cave, not underground, not in the sea, on the highest point of the landscape, above the human world, above the clouds, looking down. This is the mental model. The divine is above, the sacred is elevated. The mortal world is at the base, looking up. This architecture, high equals holy, high equals powerful, high equals closer to the divine, is not unique to Greece. It's in Hindu cosmology, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Shinto, in Norse mythology, in Aztec temple pyramid design, and in Andean religious tradition. Every one of these traditions expressed the same intuition. Proximity to heaven is a matter of altitude. They almost certainly arrived at this independently, but the tradition we know best, and the one that most shaped Western civilization, is the Greek one. And the specific mountain the Greeks put their gods on is Mount Olympus. The name itself has weight. When humans want to refer to the highest tier of anything, athletic achievement, moral excellence, cultural prestige, we call it Olympian. The Olympic Games take their name from Zeus's mountain. When we say someone is performing at an Olympian level, we're paying direct tribute to a piece of northern Greek topography and the civilization that decided it was the right place to put gods. Mount Olympus joins the Mount Rushmore. Number 1, what else could it be? I mean, this isn't surprising anyone. There's an argument, which we respect, that Everest is the obvious answer, and therefore it's not an interesting answer, and that the interesting answer is one of the mountains we've already discussed. The argument's not wrong, but here's the thing about the obvious answer. Sometimes it's obvious because it's correct. Mount Everest at 8,848.86 meters is the highest point on Earth above sea level. It sits on the border between Nepal and Tibet, and it was first surveyed by a British expedition in 1856. It was named after Sir George Everest, the British Surveyor General of India, in 1865, the same year as the Matterhorn disaster, for what it's worth. Both mountains entering the historical record simultaneously, one through triumph and one through tragedy, is the kind of thing that seems too neat to be true, but is simply the calendar. On May 29th, 1953, shortly before the creation of Albin and the Chipmunks, in case you were wondering, I got that trivia freaking drilled down in my brain, at 11:30 in the morning, Edmund Hillary of New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa of Nepal, became the first confirmed humans to stand on Everest's summit. And the news reached London in time for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II on the following day. It was read as a British triumph, an imperial gift, a sign. The man who climbed the highest mountain in the world was a colonial subject. The man alongside him was a Nepali Sherpa whose family had worked on Himalayan expeditions for decades, who had been on Everest before. What the headlines said about who climbed was a different conversation than what actually happened. Both men stood on the summit. It was reported as the last great earthly adventure. What Everest did to the human relationship with mountains is not the summit. The summit was the beginning. After 1953, Everest became the organizing principle of human ambition in the physical world. The logic is simple. If climbing the highest mountain on Earth is possible, what isn't? In 1953, the ascent was followed by a wave of Himalayan expeditions, polar expeditions, deep sea expeditions, and eventually space exploration. Not causally linked, but culturally continuous. The human appetite for demonstrating capability against the limits of the physical world was shaped by Everest's summit and then redirected everywhere. Then, in the 1990s, a commercial guide service began taking paying clients to Everest's summit. John Krakauer's Into Thin Air, published after the 1996 disaster in which 8 people died, sold millions of copies and exposed a mass audience to the culture, ethics, and mortality statistics of high-altitude mountaineering. In the years since, Everest has generated a global conversation about commercialization, environmental degradation, the ethics of putting inexperienced climbers on high-risk terrain, the treatment of Sherpa workers, and the question of what the mountain now means when hundreds of people summit it in a single day, and the waiting line at the Hillary step can stretch to 3 hours. This conversation, which is ongoing, which is global, which involves lawyers and tourism boards and environmental scientists and climbers and Nepali government officials and oxygen tank manufacturers, exists because Everest is the mountain, the organizing mountain, the one that everyone knows the name of, the one that highest refers to when people say highest, the one that the phrase, because it's there, was coined for, in response to a question about why anyone would want to climb it. George Mallory said it in 1923, and he died on the mountain the following year. His body was not found until 1999. Everest's place on this Rushmore is not simply because it's the tallest, it's because it became the category. After Everest, every other mountain is described in relation to it. The Everest of insert continent here, or the hardest thing short of Everest. It became the shared reference point for the entire human experience of mountains as a cultural and physical challenge. No mountain before or since has generated more books, more films, more documentaries, more lawsuits, more oxygen tanks, more philosophical arguments, or more opinions from people who have never left sea level. It is not an interesting mountain. It is the interesting mountain. It is the mountain that made mountains interesting. And there we go, the Mount Rushmore of mountains. Mount Everest, Mount Olympus, Mont Blanc, and the Matterhorn at number 4. Honorable mentions, we got Mount Sinai, K2, Mount Fuji, and of course, who could forget, Mountain Dew.